The cathedral bells had stopped ringing 3 minutes ago, but Seren Ashford could still feel them in her chest, a hollow resonance that matched the emptiness she carried everywhere these days. She sat in the back pew of St. Crispin's Cathedral, dressed in unrelieved black bombazine, her gloved hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere between the marble floor and the gilded altar. She was meant to be invisible. That was the entire purpose of her presence. Lady Whitmore, the elderly widow she had been hired to accompany, had been explicit in her instructions. Sit quietly. Speak to no one. Do not draw attention. You are a shadow, Miss Ashford. Behave as one. Seren was very good at being a shadow. 6 months of poverty had taught her that skill with brutal efficiency. The cathedral was filled with the cream of society. Hundreds of nobles, in their finest silks and velvets, gathered to witness the king's honoring of his most decorated war hero. The pews gleamed with jewels. The air hung thick with expensive perfume and whispered speculation. And at the front of the cathedral, standing before the altar like a dark pillar of barely contained violence, was the man they had all come to see. Corvin Ashworth, the Duke of Valmere, commander of the Northern Campaign, the man who had broken the siege of Aldermore with 300 men against 3,000, the man whose name made enemy generals surrender rather than face him on the field, the man they called the Raven of War. Seren had heard the stories. Everyone had. How he had held the Brennan Pass for 18 days without reinforcement. How he had walked through fire at the Battle of Thornwood and emerged carrying his fallen standard-bearer. How he never smiled, never laughed, never showed mercy to those who opposed him. Looking at him now, she believed every word. He stood with his back to the congregation, facing the archbishop who would bestow the king's honors. His shoulders were impossibly broad beneath his ceremonial military coat, black wool with silver insignia that caught the candlelight. His dark hair was cropped short in military fashion, and even from 30 pews back, Seren could see the scar that ran from his left temple down past his jaw, a pale slash against sun-darkened skin. He looked like what he was, a weapon forged in blood and fire. Lady Whitmore leaned toward her, her voice a papery whisper. They say he killed 40 men at Brennan Pass with nothing but a broken sword. Seren said nothing. She was a shadow. Shadows did not respond. They also say, Lady Whitmore continued with relish, that every eligible daughter in this cathedral has been positioned specifically to catch his eye when he turns. The Montfort girl is wearing a gown that cost 3,000 sovereigns. Her mother had it shipped from the continent. Seren's gaze drifted involuntarily to the front pews, where the noble family sat in calculated arrangement. She spotted the Montfort girl immediately, a vision in pale rose silk with diamonds glittering at her throat. Lady Viviana Montfort was renowned as the season's greatest beauty, and she sat with the confident posture of someone who expected to be chosen. The archbishop's voice droned through the blessing, on words about duty and sacrifice and the crown's eternal gratitude. Seren let them wash over her without meaning. She was thinking about the coins in her reticule, the 30 sovereigns Lady Whitmore would pay her for today's service. 30 sovereigns for 6 hours of silence. It would cover her mother's medicine for another month. That was all that mattered. The blessing concluded. The archbishop lifted the medallion of the Order of the Crown, gold and rubies catching fire in the candlelight, and placed it around the duke's neck. Rise, your grace, and face those who honor you. The duke turned. Seren's lungs seized. She had thought she was prepared for him. She had seen him from behind, had catalogued his size and his scars and his reputation. But nothing had prepared her for his face. He was not handsome. That word was too soft, not too pretty for what he was. His features were harsh, all sharp angles and brutal planes, as if someone had carved him from granite and forgotten to smooth the edges. The scar that bisected his face should have been disfiguring. Instead, it only emphasized the cold intensity of his eyes, gray like winter ice, like storm clouds before lightning struck. Those eyes swept across the congregation with the assessing calculation of a commander surveying a battlefield. Seren watched him catalog and dismiss the nobles in the front pews, watched his gaze pass over Lady Viviana Montfort without even a flicker of interest, and watched his expression remain as cold and empty as a frozen lake. And then those eyes reached the back of the cathedral and stopped. On her. Seren felt the impact of his attention like a physical blow. Her pulse stuttered. Her skin flushed hot beneath her mourning blacks. Every instinct screamed at her to look away, to remember her place, to be the shadow she was meant to be. She could not move. The Duke's storm-gray gaze held hers across 30 pews and 300 nobles, and something flickered in their depths. Not warmth, not interest as she understood it. Something more dangerous. Recognition, perhaps. Or calculation. The moment stretched like honey pulled from a spoon. Lady Whitmore pinched her arm, sharp and vicious. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Lower your eyes this instant. You forget yourself." The pain broke the spell. Seren dropped her gaze to her lap, her cheeks burning, her blood rushing. What had just happened? Why had he looked at her? She was nobody. Less than nobody. A paid companion in borrowed mourning clothes, and invisible by design and circumstance. The Archbishop was speaking again, something about a reception to follow in the cathedral's great hall. The congregation began to stir, preparing for the carefully orchestrated social theater that would come next, where every family with an eligible daughter would maneuver for position near the Duke. "We will leave immediately," Lady Whitmore announced, gathering her things with sharp, agitated movements. "I have no desire to participate in this vulgar display. Come, Miss Ashford." Seren rose obediently, grateful for the escape. Whatever that moment had been, whatever had passed between her and the Duke of Valmere, it was over now. She would collect her 30 sovereigns and disappear back into the gray anonymity of her life, showing the Raven of War would choose some glittering diamond of a noblewoman to be his duchess. That was how these stories went. That was how the world worked. They had almost reached the side door, almost achieved escape, when a voice cut through the murmur of the crowd like a blade through silk. "Stop." It was not loud. It did not need to be. The single word carried the absolute authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question, a man who had commanded armies and broken sieges and walked through fire. The entire cathedral fell silent. Seren's feet stopped moving before her mind could process the command. Beside her, Lady Whitmore made a strangled sound of confusion. Footsteps echoed on marble, measured, deliberate, coming closer. "Turn around." Seren turned. The Duke of Valmere stood 3 feet away from her, and close enough that she could see the individual threads of silver in his coat, close enough that she could smell smoke and leather and something darker underneath. His winter-cold stare burned into hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. Behind him, the entire congregation watched with undisguised shock. Lady Viviana Montfort's face had gone white as chalk. The Archbishop clutched his ceremonial staff as if bracing for an earthquake. "Your name," the Duke said. Not a question. A command. "Seren." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat, forced strength into her words. "Seren Ashford, Your Grace." "Ashford." He repeated the name as if tasting it. "You are not nobility." "No, Your Grace." "You are wearing mourning clothes, but they do not fit properly. They are borrowed, and you are here in service to someone." It was not a question, so Seren did not answer. Her chest tightened so hard she was certain he could hear it. "She is my companion for the day." Lady Whitmore found her voice, querulous with fear and indignation. "A hired girl, nobody of consequence. I apologize if she has given offense. Your Grace, I will dismiss her immediately and— You will be silent. Lady Whitmore's mouth snapped shut. The Duke had not looked away from Seren, had not blinked. His focus was absolute, suffocating, and impossible to escape. You did not lower your eyes, he said quietly. Everyone else in this cathedral looked away from me. Even the men who fought beside me. Even the nobles who outrank me in everything but title. They all looked away. He stepped closer, and Seren stopped breathing. But not you. A hired companion in borrowed mourning clothes. You met my gaze and held it. I meant no disrespect, Your Grace. I know. That is what makes it interesting. He reached into his coat and withdrew something. A small silver token etched with a raven in flight. He took her hand, ungloved and improper, and pressed the token into her palm. His fingers were warm and rough with calluses, the hands of a soldier rather than a gentleman. The reception begins in 1 hour, he said. You will attend. Present this token at the door. Someone will escort you to me. Seren stared at the silver raven in her hand, then back at the scarred face of the most feared man in the kingdom. Your Grace, I cannot. I am not dressed for a reception. I am not. 1 hour, Miss Ashford. He turned and walked away, leaving devastation in his wake. The whispers erupted like wildfire. Ladies clutched their pearls. Gentlemen exchanged bewildered glances. Lady Viviana Montfort looked as if she might faint or commit murder, possibly both. Lady Whitmore seized Seren's arm with bruising force. What have you done? She hissed. What did you do to catch his attention? This is a disaster, a catastrophe. I hired you to be invisible. I did nothing. Seren's voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and dreamlike. I did nothing at all. But that was not entirely true, was it? She had looked at him. She had held his gaze when everyone else looked away. And now the Raven of War had chosen her. Before all the diamonds and rubies of noble society. Before Lady Viviana Montfort and her 3,000 sovereign gown. He had chosen a shadow. The silver token burned against her palm like a promise or a threat. Seren could not tell which, but she knew, with the bone-deep certainty of someone whose life had just been derailed by forces beyond her control, that nothing would ever be the same again. Lady Whitmore dismissed her on the cathedral steps. I do not know what scheme you are running, the elderly widow spat, her face mottled with fury, but I want no part of it. You were meant to be invisible. Invisible. She thrust a handful of coins into Seren's hand, far less than the promised 30 sovereigns. Take your payment and go. I never want to see your face again. The carriage door slammed, the wheels clattered against cobblestones, and Seren stood alone on the steps of St. Crispin's Cathedral, unclutching a silver raven token and 12 sovereigns that would not last the month. Around her, the noble families departed in their gilded carriages, every eye sliding toward her with undisguised curiosity. She heard the whispers. That's her, the one he spoke to. Nobody knows who she is. Wearing mourning clothes, did you see? Viviana Montfort is absolutely beside herself. Seren forced her legs to move, descending the steps with what dignity she could muster. She needed to think. She needed to disappear. She needed to pretend this entire morning had been some fever dream brought on by too little food and too much worry. But the silver token in her hand was real. The memory of his eyes, gray and blazing with focus, was real. The command in his voice was real. 1 hour. She could not attend that reception. The idea was absurd. She was wearing borrowed mourning clothes that hung loose on her frame because she had lost weight from months of barely eating. She had no jewels, no gloves, and no proper shoes. She was a disgraced gentleman's daughter who spent her days caring for elderly widows and her nights calculating how many more weeks she could afford her mother's medicine. She did not belong in the same room as dukes and duchesses. But if she did not attend, what then? The Duke of Valmere was not a man one refused. The stories made that abundantly clear. He had once hanged 3 of his own officers for disobeying orders on the battlefield. He had broken men who crossed him, destroyed careers with a single word, and ended entire noble lines with the stroke of a pen. What would he do to a hired companion who ignored his summons, and Seren's feet carried her through the winding streets of the capital without conscious direction? She passed market stalls and coffee houses, townhouses with gleaming windows, and tenements with none. The city continued its daily business, oblivious to the fact that her world had just cracked open like an egg. She found herself standing before a modest boarding house in a respectable but unfashionable neighborhood. Home, or what passed for it now. The landlady intercepted her in the hallway. "Miss Ashford, there's a man waiting for you. Been here nearly an hour. I told him you weren't receiving visitors, but he insisted." Serene's blood ran cold. It could not be the Duke himself. Could it? "He's in the parlor," the landlady continued. "Very well dressed. Gave me a sovereign just to wait." Not the Duke, then. A sovereign was nothing to a man of his wealth, but it was the gesture of someone trying to impress, someone without unlimited resources. Serene climbed the stairs to the small parlor that served the boarding house's residents, her pulse racing with each step. She pushed open the door. The man who rose to greet her was perhaps 30, with the kind of handsomely forgettable face that could blend into any crowd. His clothes were expensive, but not ostentatious, the mark of a man who wanted to appear wealthy without attracting too much attention. He smiled, and the expression did not reach his eyes. "Miss Ashford, at last. I'm Crispin Hawthorne, solicitor and occasional man of business." He bowed with practiced elegance. "I represent certain interests that would very much like to speak with you." "I don't know what you're talking about." "No? Then perhaps you can explain why the Duke of Valmir just chose you before every eligible woman in the kingdom." He gestured to the worn settee. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss, and very little time." Serene remained standing. "How do you know what happened at the cathedral?" "Miss Ashford, everyone in the city will know within the hour. The Duke of Valmir, the most eligible bachelor in the realm, a man who has refused every marriage proposal for 15 years, publicly summons a mysterious woman in mourning clothes to his reception." He spread his hands. "This is the story of the century. Gossip sheets are being printed as we speak." Her stomach dropped. She had not considered the attention, the scrutiny, the way this would spread like fire through dry grass. "I came here," Crispin Hawthorne continued, "on behalf of someone who anticipated this moment, someone who arranged for you to be in that cathedral today." The words took a moment to penetrate. "What do you mean, arranged? Did you think it was coincidence that Lady Whitmore needed a companion today, of all days? That she hired you specifically, a woman of your particular background and appearance?" He shook his head. "Nothing about today was coincidence, Miss Ashford. You were placed in that cathedral like a chess piece, and now the Duke has made his move." Serene sank onto the settee, her legs no longer willing to support her. Who arranged this?" "Someone who has been watching you for some time. Someone who believed you possessed certain qualities that would catch the Duke's attention." He checked his pocket watch. "But we can discuss motives later. Right now, you have a reception to attend, and you cannot go looking like that." "I am not going to that reception." "Yes, you are," his voice hardened. "Because if you don't, the Duke will come looking for you. And when he discovers that you disappeared after he showed you public favor, he will be very, very displeased. You cannot afford to displease him, Miss Ashford. More importantly, your family cannot afford it." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Serene's hands clenched in her lap. "What do you know about my family?" "I know your father died 3 years ago, leaving debts that consumed everything. I know your mother is ill and requires expensive medicine. I know your brother Merrick has fallen in with gambling debts he cannot pay, ode to men who do not accept excuses. He smiled that empty smile. "No, I know you are exactly as desperate as you appear. Who are you working for?" "Someone who wants to help you. Someone who has already arranged for your mother's medicine to be delivered this morning, paid in full for 6 months. Consider it a gesture of good faith." He stood, brushing invisible lint from his coat. "There is a carriage waiting outside. Inside, you will find a suitable gown, gloves, and shoes. You have 45 minutes to make yourself presentable. I suggest you hurry." He walked to the door, then paused. "One more thing, Miss Ashford. You may be wondering why any of this is happening, why the Duke chose you, why someone went to such lengths to place you in his path. The answers will come, I promise. But for now, all you need to know is this. You have been given an opportunity that will never come again. Take it." The door closed behind him. Seren sat in the silent parlor, her mind reeling. This morning, she had been a hired companion, invisible and forgettable. Now she was trapped in a web she could not see, manipulated by forces she did not understand, summoned by a man whose very name made generals tremble. And somewhere, someone had paid for her mother's medicine. She looked at the silver raven in her hand, then at the window, where a black carriage waited on the street below. She had no choices left. Perhaps she never had. With shaking hands, Seren rose and went to meet her fate. The gown was midnight blue, so dark it appeared black, until light caught the fabric and revealed its true color. It fit her perfectly, as if it had been made for her measurements, and Seren tried not to think about what that meant, and about how long someone had been watching her, planning this moment. The carriage delivered her to the cathedral's great hall, with 5 minutes to spare. She presented the silver raven token to the footman at the door, who examined it with wide eyes before bowing deeply and summoning an attendant. "This way, miss. His Grace is expecting you." The great hall was vast, a soaring space of marble columns and crystal chandeliers, filled with the most powerful nobles in the kingdom. They parted before her like water before a ship's prow, and Serene felt every eye tracking her progress across the gleaming floor. She heard the whispers follow her like a shadow. There she is, transformed completely. Who dressed her? That gown must have cost. Viviana Montfort has been crying in the powder room. At the far end of the hall, beneath a towering window that flooded him with golden afternoon light, stood the Duke of Valmir. He was surrounded by military men and noble lords, but as Seren approached, they melted away like snow before flame, leaving him alone. He watched her cross the distance between them with that piercing stare, and Seren forced herself to hold his gaze just as she had in the cathedral. If that was what had caught his attention, she would not show weakness now. "Miss Ashford." His voice was low, pitched for her ears alone. "You came. You did not give me a choice, Your Grace." A crack appeared in his stern mask, not quite a smile. "No, I did not." He offered his arm. "Walk with me." She placed her hand on his sleeve, feeling the iron tension in his muscles. He guided her through a set of doors onto a private terrace, away from the watching crowd. The city spread out below them, a tapestry of rooftops and spires beneath a late afternoon sky. "You have questions," he said. "Many, Your Grace. Ask them." Seren turned to face him, acutely aware that they were alone, that he was close enough to touch, that his presence seemed to fill all available space. "Why me? You could have any woman in that cathedral, any woman in the kingdom. Why choose someone you know nothing about?" "I know more than you think." He leaned against the terrace railing, and the casual posture did nothing to diminish his intensity. "I know you are Seren Ashford, daughter of the late Thaddeus Ashford, a merchant who made and lost a fortune in textiles. I know your mother is Marjorie Ashford, currently ill with a wasting sickness. Or I know your brother Merrick owes 400 sovereigns to the Harrow Street gambling syndicate, who will break his legs within the fortnight if the debt goes unpaid. The blood drained from Serene's face. How do you know all that? I had you investigated the moment I left the cathedral. That was less than 2 hours ago. I have efficient people. He studied her with unnerving focus. You interest me, Miss Ashford. Do you know how rare that is? I have spent 15 years being paraded before every eligible woman in society. They blur together after a time. Pretty faces, empty heads, grasping fingers reaching for a title. But you, he stepped closer. You sat in the back of that cathedral in borrowed mourning clothes, and you looked at me like I was a man, not a title, not a prize, not a monster to be feared or a fortune to be claimed, just a man. Her heartbeat stuttered. Perhaps I did not know enough to be afraid. You know now. Are you afraid? She considered lying, but something in his expression, some flicker of genuine curiosity beneath the cold facade, demanded honesty. Yes, but I have learned that fear is a luxury I cannot afford. He regarded her for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. This is a contract. Read it. Seren took the papers with unsteady hands. The legal language was dense, but the essence was clear. She would spend the remainder of the social season as the Duke's official companion. She would attend events on his arm, dine at his table, and reside in his household as a guest. In exchange, her brother's debts would be paid, and her mother's medical care would be secured for 5 years, and upon completion of the season, she would receive a sum sufficient to establish herself independently. This is, she struggled for words. This is extraordinarily generous, Your Grace. It is a business arrangement, nothing more. What do you want in return? Truly? His jaw tightened. I want you to be seen with me. I want society to believe I am considering you for marriage. I want every matchmaking mother in the kingdom to abandon their schemes, because I have apparently made a choice. Apparently. This arrangement ends with the season. We will part ways with mutual courtesy. You will tell anyone who asks that we discovered we did not suit, that the Duke of Valmir remains unattainable. He paused. I have no interest in marriage, Miss Ashford. I have no interest in companionship of any kind. I require a shield, not a wife. Do you understand? Serene looked at the contract in her hands, at the sums that would save her family, at the opportunity that would never come again. She thought of Crispin Hawthorne's words. Someone had arranged this. Someone had placed her in that cathedral like a chess piece. But did the chess piece's motivations matter if the outcome saved those she loved? If I agree, she said slowly, I have conditions. His eyebrow rose. You are negotiating with me. You need me, Your Grace. That gives me leverage. For a moment, she thought she had miscalculated. His expression hardened, and she glimpsed the commander who had broken sieges and hanged officers. Then, impossibly, his lips curved into something that was almost a smile. Name your conditions. First, I will not lie to my family. My mother must know the truth of this arrangement. She deserves that dignity. Agreed. Second, I will not share your bed. If this arrangement requires physical intimacy, I withdraw now. His expression did not change. I have no designs on your virtue, Miss Ashford. Agreed. Third. She hesitated, knowing this was the dangerous one. When this ends, if you change your mind about marriage, if you decide to pursue someone else while I am still playing this role, you will tell me immediately. I will not be humiliated. I will not be discarded without warning. The almost smile faded. You think me capable of that kind of cruelty? I think you capable of anything, Your Grace. Your reputation is very thorough. Silence stretched between them. The sounds of the reception drifted through the terrace doors, to music and laughter and the clink of crystal. A world away from this quiet space where two people negotiated the terms of a deception. I give you my word, the Duke said finally. All 3 conditions. You will have them in writing before the night ends." Serene extended her hand. "Then, we have an arrangement." He took it, and his grip was firm and warm, just as it had been in the cathedral. But this time, he held on a moment longer than necessary, and his slate-colored gaze searched her face with a focus that made her chest tighten. "You should know," he said quietly, "that this arrangement will not be easy. My grandmother, the Dowager Duchess, will oppose you with everything she has. Lady Viviana Montfort will seek to destroy you socially. Every gossip in the kingdom will dissect your every word and gesture. You will be scrutinized, judged, and found wanting by people who have never known a moment's hardship in their entire privileged lives. I have survived hardship before, Your Grace. Not like this," he released her hand. "But I believe you will survive this too. That is why I chose you." He turned toward the terrace doors. "Come. It is time to show society that the Raven of War has made his selection." He offered his arm, and Seren took it, steeling herself for what came next. As they stepped back into the great hall, the crowd fell silent. Every face turned toward them. Every eye tracked their progress. And beside her, the most feared man in the kingdom walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had just won a battle no one else knew was being fought. But Seren could not shake the feeling that she was missing something. The Duke needed a shield, not a wife. He had said so himself. But something in his expression when he looked at her, something beneath the cold calculation and the careful control, suggested there were depths to this arrangement he had not revealed. And somewhere in the city, Crispin Hawthorne and his mysterious employer were watching. The game had begun. Seren only wished she knew the rules. Ravenhold was not a house. It was a fortress dressed in silk. The carriage passed through iron gates crowned with ravens in flight, then wound up a long drive flanked by ancient oaks. The estate rose before Seren like something from a fever dream, all gray stone and Gothic spires, windows glinting like watchful eyes in the fading light. His Grace's ancestors built Ravenhold 3 centuries ago, the footman informed her, as the carriage stopped. It has withstood 4 sieges. Seren stared up at the towering facade and believed it. This was a place built for war, for survival, for enduring whatever the world threw against it. No wonder it had produced a man like Corvin Ashworth. The interior was no less intimidating. Marble floors stretched beneath soaring ceilings, painted with scenes of battle and triumph. Portraits of stern-faced Ashworth ancestors lined the walls, their cold gazes following her progress with silent judgment. Suits of armor stood sentinel in alcoves, weapons crossed, as if waiting for an enemy that might appear at any moment. "Your rooms are in the East Wing, miss." A housekeeper in severe black appeared at her elbow, her face betraying nothing. "I am Mrs. Bramwell. His Grace has instructed that you are to be treated as an honored guest." "Thank you, Mrs. Bramwell. Your lady's maid will attend you shortly. Dinner is served at 8. His Grace dines privately when he has no guests, but tonight he has requested your presence." Seren's stomach tightened. "I see." The East Wing was a world away from the boarding house room she had called home. Her suite consisted of a sitting room, a bedroom, and a private dressing room, all decorated in shades of deep blue and silver that reminded her of the gown she now wore. Fresh flowers stood on every surface. A fire crackled in the hearth. The bed was large enough for 4 people and draped in silk that probably cost more than her father had earned in a year. She stood in the center of the bedroom, turning slowly, trying to reconcile this reality with the life she had lived just hours ago. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Ashford." "No, I'm Tansy. I've been assigned as your lady's maid." The girl who entered was perhaps 17, with bright red hair pinned beneath a cap and a scattering of freckles across her nose. Her smile was genuine, warm, utterly out of place in this cold stone fortress. "I've drawn a bath for you, miss, and laid out a gown for dinner. His Grace sent word that Madame Fournier will attend you tomorrow for a full wardrobe fitting." She paused, eyes sparkling. "The entire household is talking about you. They say you're the first person to hold His Grace's attention in 15 years. People exaggerate. Do they?" Tansy began helping her out of the midnight gown. "His Grace hasn't dined with anyone privately since he returned from the war. Not once. Even his grandmother takes her meals separately because he refuses company." Seren absorbed this information in silence. She had assumed her presence at dinner was simply part of the arrangement, a practical matter of maintaining appearances. But if the Duke truly avoided all private company, why had he requested hers? The bath was heaven, scented with lavender, and something she could not identify, something that eased the tension from her muscles and quieted the chaos in her mind. Tansy chattered pleasantly about the household, the staff, the schedule of a noble residence, and Serene let the words wash over her without truly listening. She was thinking about the contract she had signed, about the mysterious Crispin Hawthorne and his unnamed employer, about the way the Duke had looked at her in the cathedral, as if she were a puzzle he intended to solve. The dinner gown was a deep burgundy velvet that made her dark hair gleam and her pale skin glow. Simple pearls at her throat. Minimal adornment, elegant but not ostentatious. "His Grace prefers simplicity," Tansy explained. "He finds excessive ornamentation tedious. You know a great deal about his preferences." "Everyone does, miss. He's not complicated. He simply wants what he wants and has no patience for anything else." A footman escorted her to a small dining room, not the grand hall she had expected, but an intimate space with a single round table set for two. Candles provided the only light, casting warm shadows across wood-paneled walls lined with maps and military charts. The Duke rose when she entered. He had changed from his ceremonial uniform into simpler attire, a dark coat and waistcoat that somehow made him look larger, more dangerous, and more real. "Miss Ashford." He pulled out her chair himself, dismissing the footman with a gesture. "I trust your rooms are satisfactory." "More than satisfactory, Your Grace." "Good." He took his own seat across from her. "I apologize for the informality. I find large dining rooms oppressive." Seren studied him in the candlelight, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned the room, the slight positioning of his chair that gave him a clear view of both doors. The habits of a soldier, she realized. Even here, in his own home, he was prepared for attack. "You don't enjoy peace," she said quietly. His gaze sharpened. "What makes you say that? You sit like a man expecting battle. You watch the doors. You have not fully relaxed since I entered." She held his eyes. "The war ended 3 years ago, Your Grace, but you have not stopped fighting." Silence stretched between them. Seren wondered if she had overstepped, if she had finally pushed the Raven of War too far. Then his features softened almost imperceptibly. Not warmth, exactly, but recognition. "You see too much, Miss Ashford. Perhaps you let me see." The door opened before he could respond. A servant entered with the first course, and the moment shattered like glass. But as the meal progressed, as they spoke of inconsequential things, books and music and her impressions of the city, Seren could not shake the feeling that something had changed. And later that night, when she could not sleep, she found herself wandering the shadowed corridors of Ravenhold. She paused before a half-open door, drawn by the flicker of candlelight, and glimpsed the Duke standing before a wall covered entirely in names. Hundreds of names, written in neat columns, covering every inch of the surface. He stood motionless, one hand pressed flat against the wall, his head bowed. Seren retreated before he could see her, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had witnessed. She did not know whose names covered that wall, but she knew, with sudden terrible certainty, that the Raven of War was haunted by far more than he allowed the world to see. The Dowager Duchess of Valmere descended upon Ravenhold at precisely 10 o'clock the following morning, arriving in a carriage emblazoned with the family crest and attended by 4 footmen in immaculate livery. Saren was summoned to the drawing room before she had even finished breakfast. "You will address her as Your Grace," Tansy whispered hurriedly, adjusting Saren's collar. "She is His Grace's grandmother on his father's side. She has run this family for 40 years. She is—" Tansy hesitated. "She is formidable, miss, but fair. Usually." The word usually did not inspire confidence. The Dowager Duchess Lysandra Ashworth was not what Serene expected. She had anticipated someone shriveled and ancient, a relic of a bygone era. Instead, she found a tall woman with iron-gray hair swept into an elegant arrangement, sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, and the erect posture of someone who had never once in her life been uncertain of her own worth. She wore black, as Seren had at the cathedral, but her black was silk and jet beads and a mourning brooch containing a miniature portrait. Her black was expensive. Her black was power. "So," the Dowager's voice cracked through the drawing room like a whip, "you are the creature who has turned my grandson's head." Seren curtsied deeply. "Your Grace, it is an honor. Do not waste my time with pleasantries. Sit." Seren sat. The Dowager circled her slowly, examining her from every angle as one might examine a horse at auction. Her gaze catalogued every detail: the borrowed quality of Seren's posture, the careful arrangement of her hair, the way her hands remained steady despite the scrutiny. "You are not beautiful," the Dowager pronounced. "Your features are too irregular, your coloring too pale. You are not wealthy. Your family name means nothing. You possess no connections, no lineage, and no property." She stopped directly before Seren's chair. "Tell me why my grandson chose you." "I do not know, Your Grace. Lies will not serve you here. It is not a lie. His Grace approached me at the cathedral. I did not seek his attention. I did not even know who he was until he spoke to me. And yet, here you are, installed in Ravenhold, dining privately with the Duke, wearing gowns that cost more than your father earned in a decade." The Dowager's eyes narrowed. "Someone is playing a very deep game, Miss Ashford. The question is whether you are the player or the piece." Seren met her gaze directly. "I am a piece, Your Grace. I know that. Someone arranged for me to be in that cathedral. Someone provided my gown last night. Someone is moving events according to a plan I do not understand." Surprise flickered across the Dowager's face. "You admit this freely." "You would discover the truth regardless. Lying would only delay the inevitable and cost me your respect. You assume I have respect to give." "I assume nothing, Your Grace. I simply prefer honesty to pretense." The Dowager was silent for a long moment. Then she lowered herself into the chair across from Seren, her movements deliberate and controlled. "My grandson returned from the war 3 years ago. He has not been the same since." She spoke the words flatly, without emotion, but her fingers tightened on the arm of her chair. "He was not always cold, Miss Ashford. As a boy, he laughed. He played. He dreamed of adventure and glory. The war gave him adventure. It gave him glory. It took everything else." Seren thought of the wall of names, the soldiers who died under his command. "You know about the wall." The Dowager's expression flickered with something like pain. "He wrote every name himself, 437 men. He remembers each one, their faces and their families, how they died. He carries them with him always. That is an impossible weight. Yes, it is." The Dowager leaned forward. "I have tried for 3 years to pull him back to life. I have paraded eligible women before him. I have arranged dinners and balls and every social event imaginable. Nothing reaches him. Nothing penetrates the fortress he has built around himself." Her eyes bored into Seren's. "And then yesterday, he saw you, and something changed. For the first time in 3 years, he looked at a woman as if she were real. Serene's throat tightened. I do not know why. Neither do I, and that terrifies me. The Dowager rose, moving to the window with her back to Serene. I have investigated you thoroughly, Miss Ashford. Your father was a good man who made poor decisions. Your mother is kind, but weak. Your brother is a fool who will destroy himself if someone does not intervene. And you, she turned. You have spent the last 2 years holding your family together through sheer force of will. You have taken positions beneath your station. You have sacrificed your own prospects. You have never once complained. Complaining accomplishes nothing. Precisely. The Dowager's voice softened fractionally. You have steel in you, Miss Ashford. Hidden beneath that demure exterior is something hard and unyielding. That is what my grandson saw. That is what caught his attention. I am not trying to catch anyone, Your Grace. I know. That is what makes you dangerous. She crossed back to Serene, stopping close enough that her perfume, lily of the valley, and something sharper, filled the air between them. I will be watching you, Miss Ashford. If you hurt my grandson, if you betray him, if you exploit his vulnerabilities for personal gain, I will destroy you. Not your reputation. Not your prospects. You. Do we understand each other? Perfectly, Your Grace. Good. The Dowager moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. The man who approached you yesterday, Crispin Hawthorne, he works for Lord Aldrich Vance. Do you know that name? Saren shook her head. Lord Vance was my grandson's commanding officer during the war. They had a falling out. Vance has been seeking leverage against Corvin for years. The Dowager's expression hardened. Whatever game is being played, Miss Ashford, you are caught between two very dangerous men. I suggest you decide where your loyalties lie. She swept from the room, leaving Serene alone with the weight of revelation. Lord Aldrich Vance, the Duke's former commander, the man behind Crispin Hawthorne, the man who had placed her in that cathedral like a chess piece. But why? What did Vance want with the Duke of Valmere? And why had he chosen Serene as his instrument? The questions circled in her mind like carrion birds, finding no purchase, no answers. She had entered a war she did not understand, fighting for a man she barely knew, against an enemy she had never seen. And somewhere in this house, behind his walls of ice and silence, the Raven of War carried the names of 437 dead men. Serene wondered if there was room on that wall for one more. 5 days passed in a blur of activity. Madame Fournier arrived with bolts of fabric and an army of seamstresses. Morning gowns, afternoon gowns, evening gowns, ball gowns. Serene stood for hours while they pinned and measured and debated the merits of various silhouettes. She felt like a doll being dressed for display. The Duke was largely absent, consumed by parliamentary duties and estate business. They crossed paths at meals, exchanging polite conversation, maintaining the careful distance of two people who had agreed to pretend intimacy without actually achieving it. But Serene noticed things, the way his eyes found her whenever she entered a room, the slight softening of his expression when she made an observation that surprised him, the deliberate care with which he ensured her comfort, adjusting fires, requesting specific dishes, arranging for books to be delivered to her sitting room. He was watching her as closely as she watched him. On the 6th evening, Serene found herself restless. Dinner had concluded hours ago. The house had settled into nighttime quiet. But sleep would not come, and the walls of her elegant prison felt suffocating. She wandered the corridors of Ravenhold, telling herself she was exploring, knowing she was searching. For what, she could not say. She found him in the library. It was a vast room, 2 stories of shelves stretching toward a painted ceiling, rolling ladders providing access to the highest reaches. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across leather spines and gilded letters. The Duke sat in a chair before the fire, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his gaze fixed on nothing. He had removed his coat and waistcoat, wearing only shirt sleeves and a loosened cravat. It was the most informal she had ever seen him, and somehow it made him more intimidating rather than less. "Miss Ashford." He did not look at her. "You should be asleep." "So should you." His lips twitched. "I rarely sleep." The names on the wall. Now he looked at her, and his eyes were dark with something she could not name. "You saw that." "I apologize. I did not mean to intrude." "And yet you mention it now." Seren moved into the room, drawn by something stronger than caution. 437 men. So your grandmother told me. My grandmother talks too much. She loves you. She wants to manage me. There is a difference. He took a long swallow from his glass. "Why are you here, Miss Ashford? In this room, at this hour?" I could not sleep. Neither could I. But I asked why you came here, to this room specifically. Seren considered lying, but they were past pretense now, past the careful choreography of their arrangement. "I came looking for you." A shadow crossed his features. "Why?" "Because you carry a weight that is crushing you, and you will not let anyone help. Because you sit alone in the dark with your ghosts, and I understand what that feels like. Because..." She hesitated. "Because I wanted to tell you that you do not have to carry it alone." The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Seren waited for him to dismiss her, to retreat behind his walls, to become the cold and distant Duke once more. Instead, he spoke. "At Brennan Pass, we held the line for 18 days. His voice was low, rough, as if the words were being dragged from somewhere deep. "We were outnumbered 10-1. Relief was supposed to come in 3 days. It did not. Every night I walked among my men. I knew their names, their families, their fears. I promised them we would survive." He set down his glass, his hands unsteady. "On the 15th day, we ran out of supplies. On the 16th, the enemy broke through our eastern flank. I rallied the men for a counterattack that very hour. 37 volunteered. We pushed them back." His jaw tightened. None of the 37 survived. Seren's chest ached. "Yeah, you could not have known." "I should have known. I was their commander. Their lives were my responsibility." He rose abruptly, moving to the window, his back to her. "Relief came on the 19th day. By then, half my men were dead. The historians call it a victory. The king gave me medals, and I cannot close my eyes without seeing their faces." She crossed to him, stopping close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "That is why you do not sleep. That is why I do not live." He turned to face her, and his eyes were raw, stripped of all defenses. "I survived when they did not. I came home to titles and honors, and a grandmother, who wants me to marry and produce heirs. As if I deserve any of it. As if I have not spent 3 years wishing I had died with them." Seren's hand rose without conscious thought, pressing flat against his chest where his heart beat beneath her palm. "You did not die. That means something. Does it? It means you still have the chance to live, to honor them by living, not by burying yourself in guilt and isolation." Her voice broke slightly. "They followed you because they believed in you. They would not want this for you." He stared down at her, his chest rising and falling beneath her hand, his expression shifting through emotions she could not track. Then, slowly, he reached up and covered her hand with his own. "You are not what I expected, Seren Ashford." It was the first time he had used her given name. "Neither are you." She managed a trembling smile. "The stories made you sound like a monster, but you are just a man who has lost too much and does not know how to grieve." "Is that what this is? Grief?" "I think so. I think you never let yourself feel it, so it turned into something else. Something that is slowly killing you. His hand tightened on hers. His eyes searched her face with a focus that made the air abandon her lungs. He leaned closer, and she could smell the whiskey on his breath, the smoke from the fire, the cedar and iron that seemed to cling to his skin. "You should not be here," he murmured, "alone with me, in the middle of the night. I know. I am not a good man, Seren. I have done things in war that would horrify you. I know that too. Then why do you look at me like that? Like what? Like I am worth saving." Before she could answer, the library door burst open. "Your Grace." A footman stood in the doorway, breathless and pale. "Forgive the intrusion. There has been an incident. Lord Vance's men have been seen near the estate boundary, and a message has arrived." He held out a sealed envelope. "It is addressed to Miss Ashford." Corvin's expression transformed instantly, all warmth vanishing behind a mask of cold fury. He took the envelope, examined the seal, and then handed it to Seren. "Open it." Her hands trembled as she broke the wax. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words written in elegant script. "The game begins." Seren looked up at Corvin, at the rage smoldering in his iron-gray gaze, and understood that whatever fragile peace they had built in this room had just shattered. Lord Vance had made his move, and she was caught directly in the crossfire. The Harrington Ball was the event of the season, and every eye in the ballroom turned when the Duke of Valmere entered with Seren Ashford on his arm. She wore a gown of deep silver silk that caught the candlelight like moonlight on water. Madame Fournier had outdone herself, creating something that was elegant without being ostentatious, striking without being vulgar. Diamonds borrowed from the Ashworth collection glittered at her throat and ears, and her dark hair was swept up to reveal the graceful line of her neck. But it was not the gown or the jewels that drew attention. It was the way the Duke looked at her. Corvin Ashworth, the Raven of War, the man who had not smiled in 3 years, walked through the Harrington ballroom with something approaching warmth in his expression. His hand rested at the small of Seren's back, with a possessiveness that sent ripples of shock through the assembled nobility. "They are staring," Seren murmured. "Let them." His voice was low, meant for her ears alone. "Tonight, you are not a piece in someone else's game. Tonight, you are mine." The word sent heat spreading through her chest. She knew this was still performance, still the arrangement they had agreed upon. But since that night in the library, since his confession and her touch and the message that had shattered the moment, something had shifted between them. They had not spoken of it. There had been no time. Corvin had spent the past 3 days fortifying the estate, sending messages, preparing for whatever Lord Vance intended. But she had caught him watching her with a focus that made her pulse race, and she had found herself watching him in return. "The Dowager is here," Seren observed, spotting the iron-haired woman holding court near the refreshment tables. "She does not look pleased." "My grandmother is never pleased. It is her natural state." "And Lady Viviana Montfort is approaching from the left, with murder in her eyes." Corvin's hand tightened slightly at her back. "Allow me to handle Lady Viviana." The blonde beauty materialized before them in a cloud of rose perfume and barely concealed hostility. Her gown was pink silk, trimmed with pearls, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Your Grace," she curtsied with exaggerated courtesy. "How wonderful to see you attending social functions again. And Miss Ashford." The pause before her name was deliberate. "What an unexpected rise in circumstances. 1 week ago, while you were a hired companion, now you stand beside a duke. How fortunate." "Fortune had little to do with it," Seren replied evenly. "His Grace chose me. I believe that is the relevant fact." Lady Viviana's eyes narrowed. "Chose you for what, precisely? A season's entertainment? A momentary distraction?" She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a poisonous whisper. Everyone knows this cannot last. You are a novelty, nothing more. When he tires of you, and he will tire of you, you will return to whatever poverty you crawled from. And I will still be here. Lady Viviana. Corvin's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You seem to be laboring under several misapprehensions. Allow me to correct them. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Saren and the blonde woman, and his expression made Lady Viviana take an involuntary step back. Miss Ashford is under my protection. Any insult to her is an insult to me. Any attempt to harm her reputation will be met with consequences you cannot imagine. His voice was soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. I have ended careers with less provocation, Lady Viviana. I have destroyed families who crossed me. Do not test whether I would do the same for her. Lady Viviana's face went white. Your Grace, I meant no offense. You meant exactly what you said. The difference is that now you understand the cost. He offered his arm to Saren. Miss Ashford, I believe the first waltz is about to begin. He led her away, leaving Lady Viviana frozen in their wake. Serene's blood rushed through her veins. You did not need to do that, she said quietly. Yes, I did. He guided her onto the dance floor as the orchestra began to play. I told you that you would face opposition. I also told you that I would not let you be humiliated. The arrangement does not require you to defend my honor. The arrangement requires me to appear devoted to you. He pulled her into position, one hand at her waist, the other clasping her fingers. Tonight, I am not appearing. They began to move, and the world fell away. Saren had learned to dance as a girl, before her father's fortune collapsed, but she had never danced like this. Corvin led her with the assured command of a man accustomed to controlling battlefields, and she followed as naturally as breathing. They swept across the floor in perfect synchronization, and she felt weightless, transformed, and alive in a way she had not felt in years. You dance beautifully, he murmured. You sound surprised. I am surprised by everything about you. His eyes held hers, his gaze blazing with emotion. Every day, you reveal something new, something unexpected. I have spent 3 years feeling nothing, and now I cannot stop feeling. Air abandoned her lungs. Corvin, do not tell me to stop. Do not tell me this is merely arrangement. His hand tightened at her waist. I have been dead for 3 years, Saren. You are bringing me back to life. Let me have this moment. The music swelled toward its conclusion. Around them, the other dancers had faded to insignificance. There was only him, only this, only the electricity crackling between their bodies. The waltz ended. They stood motionless in the center of the ballroom, breathing hard, staring at each other with a hunger that made the watching crowd murmur. Then Corvin lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, lingering far longer than propriety allowed. Come with me, he said. I need to speak with you. Privately. He led her through a set of doors onto a moonlit terrace. The night air was cool against her flushed skin, and the sounds of the ball faded to distant music. I have been thinking, he began, about the arrangement, about what happens when the season ends. Saren's chest clenched. You wish to end it early. No. He stepped closer, his expression fierce. I wish to not end it at all. What are you saying? I am saying that I do not want you to leave when the season concludes. I am saying that this arrangement has become something I didn't anticipate, on something I don't want to lose. He took her hands in his, and his grip was desperate. I am saying that I think I am falling in love with you, Saren Ashford, and I have no idea what to do about it. The confession hung between them like a held breath. Saren stared up at his scarred face, at the vulnerability he so rarely showed, at the man beneath the legend. I think I am falling in love with you too, she whispered. His exhale was ragged. He pulled her closer, one hand rising to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "I've wanted to kiss you since the library," he murmured. "Every moment since then has been torture." "Then stop torturing yourself." He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was not careful. It was the kiss of a man who had denied himself for too long, who had finally allowed himself to want something, who was claiming her with every fiber of his being. His mouth moved against hers with fierce possession, and she responded in kind, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body pressing against his. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, his forehead rested against hers. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we face it together. Agreed?" "Agreed." The terrace doors burst open. Crispin Hawthorne stood in the doorway, flanked by two men in military uniforms. His face was pale, his usual smug confidence replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace, but Lord Vance is here, and he has brought documents that he claims will destroy you both." Lord Aldrich Vance was waiting in the Harringtons' private study, a glass of brandy in his hand and a smile on his face that made Seren's blood run cold. He was older than she expected, perhaps 50, with silver hair swept back from a handsome face that bore the marks of command. His uniform was immaculate, decorated with medals and honors that proclaimed his status as a war hero. But there was something wrong in his eyes, something hollow and calculating that reminded her of a snake waiting to strike. "Corvin." He said the name like a curse wrapped in silk. "How delightful to see you again. And this must be the mysterious Miss Ashford." His gaze swept over her with undisguised assessment. "My compliments on your taste. She is quite lovely." "What do you want, Vance?" Corvin's voice was ice. "Straight to business. I always admired that about you." Vance set down his glass and withdrew a leather folder from his coat. "I have spent 3 years gathering evidence, Corvin. 3 years compiling testimony, documents, records. Everything I need to prove what really happened at Brennan Pass." Seren felt Corvin stiffen beside her. "There is nothing to prove. I held the pass. We won. You held the pass by sacrificing 37 men in a suicide attack that you knew would fail." Vance's smile widened. "I have testimony from survivors who claim you deliberately sent them to their deaths. I have letters you wrote that suggest you knew relief was delayed and chose not to share that information with your troops. I have evidence that the great hero of Brennan Pass is actually a murderer who let his men die to preserve his own glory. That is a lie. Is it? The court-martial will determine that." Vance opened the folder, spreading documents across the desk. "You see, Corvin, I have been waiting for this moment. Waiting for you to emerge from your self-imposed exile. Waiting for you to give me leverage." His eyes flicked to Seren. "And then you chose her. A nobody with a desperate family and a mountain of secrets. The perfect weapon." Seren's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Miss Ashford, that your brother's gambling debts are owed to me. The Harrow Street Syndicate answers to me. That the medicine keeping your mother alive comes from my suppliers. That every thread of your survival is wound around my fingers." Vance's voice was silken. "I arranged for you to be in that cathedral. I knew Corvin would notice you. He has a weakness for damaged things. You used me. I positioned you. There is a difference." He turned back to Corvin. "Here is what happens now. You will publicly denounce Miss Ashford as a fortune hunter. You will return to your isolation. And you will sign a document admitting to the accusations I have outlined. And if I refuse, then I destroy you both." Vance's voice hardened. "Miss Ashford's family will be ruined. Her brother will lose his legs, then his life. Her mother will lose access to the medicine keeping her alive. And you, Corvin, will face a court-martial that will strip you of your titles, your lands, and your honor. Everything you have left will burn." The silence was suffocating. Seren looked at Corvin, at the rage smoldering in his eyes, at the tension in every line of his body, and he looked ready to kill Vance with his bare hands. But he did not move, because Vance was holding her family hostage, and Corvin knew it. "What is the real reason?" Seren asked quietly. "Why do you hate him so much?" Vance's smile flickered. "I do not hate him. I simply cannot allow him to exist. That is not an answer. It is the only answer you will receive." He gathered the documents back into the folder. "You have 24 hours, Corvin. Denounce her and sign the confession, or watch everything burn." He left, and the room seemed to exhale. Corvin stood motionless, his hands clenched at his sides, his expression a mask of controlled fury. Seren wanted to reach for him, to offer comfort, but she was frozen by the weight of what had just happened. "This is my fault," she said finally. "If I had not agreed to the arrangement, no, if I had walked away when I had the chance. Do not," his voice was sharp, "do not blame yourself for his machinations. But my family, I will protect your family. I will find a way. How? He controls everything. The debts, the medicine, the evidence." Her voice cracked. "He planned this perfectly, Corvin. There is no way out that does not destroy one of us. There is always a way out. Not this time." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "You have to denounce me. You have to sign whatever he wants. Your honor, your legacy, everything you have left depends on it. And what about you? What about us? There is no us." The words tore from her throat like broken glass. "There cannot be. That was always the truth, was it not? I am a hired companion in borrowed clothes. You are a duke. This was never meant to be real." "It became real." He crossed to her, gripping her shoulders. "In the library, on that terrace, when I kissed you. That was real. Real does not matter when my mother will die without her medicine, when my brother will be killed." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I cannot let my family suffer for something I want. That is not a sacrifice I can make. So you will sacrifice yourself instead. If I have to." She pulled free of his grip, stepping back. "I will leave tonight. I will tell anyone who asks that I deceived you, that I was working with Vance all along, that you discovered my treachery and cast me out. Your reputation will survive. Your honor will be intact." "And what about my heart?" The question hung between them, raw and bleeding. "You will recover," she whispered. "Dukes always do." She fled before he could respond, before she could see the devastation in his eyes, before she could change her mind and doom everyone she loved. The silver gown felt like a shroud as she ran through the corridors of the Harrington mansion. The diamonds at her throat felt like chains. Everything she had gained in the past week was crumbling to ash around her. She found Tansy waiting with the carriage and gave orders for immediate departure. Not to Ravenhold, to her mother's modest home in the unfashionable district. Back to the life she had briefly escaped. As the carriage pulled away from the glittering mansion, Seren pressed her hand to the window and watched the lights fade into darkness. She had chosen her family over her heart. She told herself it was the right decision. She almost believed it. Home was smaller than she remembered. The modest rooms felt cramped after the soaring spaces of Ravenhold. The worn furniture looked shabbier. The smell of her mother's illness hung in the air, sharp and medicinal, a constant reminder of everything at stake. "Seren," her mother's voice was weak but warm. "You've come back." "I have, Mother. The letters you sent said you were well, that the arrangement was proceeding smoothly." Marjorie Ashford's pale eyes searched her daughter's face. "What happened?" Seren could not tell her the truth, could not explain about Vance, about the threats, about the impossible choice she had been forced to make. Her mother was too fragile for that burden. "It simply did not work out," she said quietly. The Duke and I were not suited after all. Marjorie was silent for a long moment. Then she reached out and took Serene's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. You are lying to me, child. I raised you. I know when you are hiding something. She squeezed gently. But I also know you would not have returned without good reason. Whatever happened, you did what you believed was right. Serene's throat tightened. I did what I had to do. That is not the same thing. Merrick found her in the kitchen an hour later, attempting to prepare a meal from their meager supplies. Her brother looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes, a nervous energy in his movements that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting fear. Vance's men came by yesterday, he said without preamble. They said the debt has been called due, all of it, immediately. Serene's hand stilled. How much time do we have? 3 days. Merrick's voice cracked. Serene, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I could win enough to clear the balance. I thought you could chase fortune instead of building it. She heard the bitterness in her own voice and hated it. Just like father. I know I have failed you, failed all of us. He slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. What are we going to do? Serene had no answer. The days that followed were a blur of fear and desperation. She sought work, any work, but word had spread. The mysterious companion who had captured and then lost the Duke of Valmere was now infamous. Doors that might have opened, closed in her face. Opportunities evaporated before she could grasp them, and every night, when she finally collapsed into her narrow bed, she dreamed of him. Corvin's gray eyes blazing with emotion, his hands warm against her skin, his voice rough and broken, confessing feelings she had never expected to hear. I think I am falling in love with you. She woke from those dreams with tears on her cheeks and an ache in her chest that would not fade. On the 3rd day, as she sat beside her mother's bed, reading aloud from a battered novel, a knock came at the door. Merrick answered it. She heard voices, then footsteps. Then her brother's face appeared in the doorway, pale with shock. Serene, there's someone here to see you. She set down the book and went to the parlor. The Dowager Duchess Lysandra Ashworth stood in the center of the modest room, her elegant black gown wildly out of place against the worn furniture and faded curtains. Her expression was unreadable. Miss Ashford. Her voice was crisp. You and I need to talk. You left without explanation. The Dowager settled into the best chair the parlor offered, which was not saying much. My grandson has been impossible ever since. He has locked himself in his study, refused food, refused visitors, refused everything except whiskey and silence. I am sorry for his distress, Your Grace. Are you? The Dowager's eyes sharpened. Because from where I sit, it appears you inflicted that distress deliberately. You made him feel something for the first time in 3 years, and then you vanished like smoke. I had no choice. There is always a choice. You chose wrong. Serene's composure cracked. Lord Vance threatened my family, my mother's medicine, my brother's life. Everything we have depends on his mercy. If I had stayed, if I had let Corvin fight for me, they would have suffered the consequences. And you thought sacrificing yourself would save them? Yes. Then you are a fool. The Dowager leaned forward. Vance does not want your family destroyed. He wants Corvin destroyed. Your family is simply leverage. The moment you left, you gave him exactly what he wanted. Proof that Corvin can be broken through the people he cares about. Serene's blood turned to ice. What do you mean? I mean that Vance has already moved against my grandson. The court-martial documents have been filed. The accusations are public. Every newspaper in the kingdom is printing stories about the hero of Brennan Pass and his alleged war crimes. The Dowager's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. Corvin faces ruin, Miss Ashford. Complete and total ruin. And without you, I has no reason to fight it. He would not. Surrender? Give up? Let Vance win? The Dowager's laugh was bitter. My grandson has been surrendering for 3 years. He simply called it duty. The only time I have seen him fight, truly fight, was when you were in the room. Serene's legs would not hold her. She sank onto the settee, her mind reeling. I thought I was protecting him. You were protecting yourself. There is a difference. The Dowager's voice softened fractionally. I do not say this to be cruel, Miss Ashford. I say it because you need to understand the situation clearly. Vance will not stop with Corvin. Once he has destroyed my grandson, he will turn his attention to everyone connected to him, including you, including your family. Then what do? You fight. The Dowager rose, her posture commanding despite her age. You go back to Ravenhold. You stand beside my grandson. You give him a reason to believe that something in this wretched world is worth saving. And if Vance follows through on his threats, then we face him together, united. The Dowager moved to the door, then paused. I have arranged for your mother to be moved to a private sanatorium outside the city, the finest care available. Vance's suppliers will have no access to her there. Your brother is being escorted to the Ashworth country estate as we speak. He will be safe until this is resolved. Serene stared at her. You did all that. I protect what belongs to my family. The Dowager's eyes met hers. And whether you realize it or not, Miss Ashford, you belong to this family now. The only question is whether you are willing to fight for it. The choice hung before her, terrifying and simple. She could stay here, hiding, watching from a distance as everything collapsed. Or she could go back, face Vance, stand beside Corvin even if it meant sharing his destruction. She thought of his voice in the library, confessing his guilt and his grief. She thought of his hands on her face, trembling with emotion he could not contain. She thought of the kiss on the terrace, fierce and desperate and real. Whatever comes next, we face it together. She had agreed to that. She had promised. Your Grace. Serene's voice was steady now. I need a carriage. The Dowager's smile was sharp with approval. There is one waiting outside. I had hoped you would make the correct decision. Serene rose, smoothed her worn dress, and lifted her chin. Then let us go save a duke. Ravenhold loomed against the evening sky, like a fortress preparing for siege. Serene's carriage passed through the iron gates as the last light faded from the horizon. Torches blazed along the drive, and she could see figures moving on the battlements, not decorative figures, armed men. His Grace has been preparing for attack since you left, the Dowager said from her seat across the carriage. He believes Vance will move against the estate directly once the court-martial proceedings begin. Would Vance really attack a duke's home? Vance would do anything to destroy Corvin. Their hatred runs deeper than you know. The carriage stopped before the main entrance. Footmen rushed to assist them, and Mrs. Bramwell appeared in the doorway, her severe face softening with relief when she saw Serene. Miss Ashford, thank heavens, he has been asking for you. Where is he? The library, where he always is now. He has not left it in 3 days. Serene gathered her courage and walked through the familiar corridors, her pulse quickening with each step. The house felt different now, charged with tension and fear. Servants moved with quick efficiency. Guards stood at every intersection. She pushed open the library door. Corvin stood before the fireplace, a glass in his hand, his back to her. He had not shaved in days. His clothes were rumpled. He looked like a man who had stopped caring whether he lived or died. I told you I wanted to be alone, he said without turning. Whatever it is can wait. It cannot wait. He spun around. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the hearth. Serene. Her name was a prayer, a curse, a desperate plea. He crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped just short of touching her, as if afraid she might vanish if he moved too quickly. You came back. I should never have left. You had to protect your family. My family is safe. Your grandmother saw to that." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his unshaved jaw, the heat of his skin. "I was wrong, Corvin. I thought leaving would protect you. Instead, I gave Vance exactly what he wanted. I do not care about Vance. You should. He has filed court-martial papers. The accusations are public. Everything you have worked for means nothing without you." He grabbed her hands, pressing them to his chest. "I've spent 3 days in this room, drinking myself into oblivion, trying to understand how everything went so wrong so quickly. And do you know what I realized?" "What?" "I realized that I was willing to lose everything. The title, the lands, the legacy, all of it." His voice cracked. "But I wasn't willing to lose you. And when you left, when you walked away to save your family, I understood for the first time what it felt like to truly lose something that mattered." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I am so sorry. Do not apologize. You did what you believed was right. That is who you are." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "But I need you to understand something, Seren. I am going to fight Vance. I am going to expose every lie he has told, every manipulation he has executed. And I am going to win. Not for my honor. Not for my legacy. For you." "Corvin, let me finish." His gaze held fierce conviction. "I love you. Not the arrangement. Not the performance. You. The woman who held my gaze in the cathedral. The woman who saw through my walls. The woman who touched my hand in this very room and told me I did not have to carry my burdens alone." He leaned closer, his forehead pressing against hers. "I want to spend the rest of my life earning the right to stand beside you, if you will let me. You do not need to earn anything." Her voice trembled. "I love you too. I have loved you since the library, maybe before. I was just too afraid to admit it. Then we are both fools. Yes, but perhaps we can be fools together." He kissed her, and it was nothing like the fierce claiming on the terrace. This was tender, reverent, a promise sealed with touch. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and she melted into him, as if she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, the library door opened. The Dowager entered, followed by Crispin Hawthorne. "Forgive the interruption," Crispin said, his usual smugness replaced by urgency. "But there have been developments. Lord Vance made a critical error. In his haste to file the court-martial papers, he included documents that prove his own complicity in the delayed relief at Brennan Pass." Corvin went still. "What?" "He was the commanding officer who decided to hold back reinforcements. He made the call to let you suffer while he positioned himself for political advantage." Crispin spread papers across the desk. "I have testimony from 3 officers who were present when Vance gave the order. I have correspondence that proves he knew relief was available and chose not to send it." "You have been working against Vance this entire time," Seren said slowly. "Why?" "Because he destroyed my family 15 years ago. I have been waiting for the opportunity to return the favor." Crispin's smile was cold. "Miss Ashford, you were meant to be his weapon. Instead, you became mine." "The court-martial," Corvin said. "If we present this evidence, Vance will be the one facing charges, not you." Crispin gathered the papers. "I have already delivered copies to the appropriate authorities. By morning, Lord Aldrich Vance will be the most infamous man in the kingdom." The Dowager moved to Corvin's side, her hand resting briefly on his shoulder. "It is over, my boy. The nightmare is finally over." Corvin looked at Seren, his gray eyes bright with emotion. "Not over, just beginning." The season's end ball was the culmination of everything society had spent months anticipating. Every noble family in the kingdom attended. Every eligible lord and lady displayed their finest attire. Every gossip sharpened their tongues for the evening's entertainment. But this year, There was only one topic of conversation. Lord Aldrich Vance had been arrested the previous morning. The charges were extensive: conspiracy, obstruction of military relief, falsification of records, and 17 counts of conduct unbecoming an officer. His trial would begin within the fortnight. And the Duke of Valmere, the man Vance had tried to destroy, stood at the top of the grand staircase with Saren Ashford on his arm. She wore a gown of midnight blue, so dark it appeared black, until light caught the fabric and revealed its true color. The same gown she had worn to that first reception. Corvin had requested it specifically. Around her throat glittered the Ashworth sapphires, stones that had not been worn since his mother's death. "Everyone is staring," she murmured, echoing words she had spoken weeks ago. "Let them." His voice was warm with amusement. "Tonight, I want them to stare." They descended the staircase together, and the crowd parted before them like waves before a ship. Saren saw familiar faces: Lady Viviana Montfort, pale and silent, her dreams of becoming Duchess thoroughly shattered. The Dowager, resplendent in black silk, nodding with approval. Crispin Hawthorne, lurking near the refreshments, his work finally complete. And she saw her mother, and seated in a wheeled chair near the musicians, healthier than she had looked in months. The sanatorium had worked miracles. Beside her stood Merrick, sober and steady, wearing new clothes that fit properly, and an expression of cautious hope. Corvin guided her to the center of the ballroom as the orchestra began to play. But instead of taking position for the waltz, he stopped, turned to face her, and dropped to one knee. The collective gasp nearly drowned out the music. "Saren Ashford," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. 3 weeks ago, you sat in the back of a cathedral, wearing borrowed mourning clothes. You were meant to be invisible. You were meant to say nothing. But you looked at me when everyone else looked away, and my entire world changed." Tears pricked at Saren's eyes. "Corvin, I have spent 3 years as a dead man walking, carrying guilt, carrying grief, carrying the names of 437 soldiers who deserved better than I gave them." His voice cracked slightly. "You taught me that surviving is not the same as living. You taught me that love is worth the risk of loss. You made me want to be present instead of merely existing." He reached into his coat and withdrew a ring, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, ancient and beautiful. "This ring belonged to my mother. My father gave it to her the night he proposed, against his family's wishes, against all practical considerations. He chose love over duty. He chose happiness over expectation." Corvin's gaze held hers, blazing with fierce joy. "I'm choosing you, Saren, before all the diamonds and titles of noble society. Sure, before every eligible woman in this room. I am choosing the woman who saw me when I was invisible, who held my gaze when I was terrifying, who loved me when I was broken." He held up the ring. "Will you marry me?" The ballroom held its breath. Saren looked at the man kneeling before her, the scarred face, the winter eyes, the hands that had carried the weight of war and learned to reach for something gentler, the heart that had been locked away for 3 years and finally broken free. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing clear across the silent room. "In this life and every life that follows, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, rose, and kissed her in front of every noble in the kingdom. The crowd erupted. Some applauded, some gasped, some whispered furiously behind their fans. But Saren did not care. She was in his arms, and that was the only place she had ever wanted to be. 1 year later, the cathedral bells rang across the city, announcing the marriage of the Duke and Duchess of Valmere. Saren stood at the altar in a gown of ivory silk, her hand clasped in Corvin's, speaking vows that would bind them for eternity. The pews were filled with nobility and commoners alike, for the Duke had insisted that anyone who wished to attend should be welcomed. Her mother wept happy tears from the front row. Merrick stood as one of the groomsmen, steady and proud. The dowager occupied her traditional seat with an expression that might have been satisfaction. And when the ceremony concluded, when Corvin lifted her veil and kissed her as his wife, the cheers that echoed through St. Crispin's Cathedral could be heard across the city. That evening, from in the library of Ravenhold, Seren found her husband standing before the wall of names. But something had changed. Below the 437 soldiers in fresh gold paint were new words. They are remembered. They are honored. They are at peace. And so, at last, am I. Seren moved to his side, slipping her hand into his. When did you add that? This morning, before the ceremony. He turned to look at her, and his eyes were clear for the first time since she had known him. I will carry them always. But you taught me that carrying them does not mean being crushed by them. I love you, she said simply. And I love you. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. My Duchess, my partner, my heart. Your wife, she added. Yes. His smile was soft and real and full of wonder. My wife. Years later, when historians wrote about the Duke of Valmir, they would speak of his military triumphs, his political influence, and his role in reforming the treatment of soldiers returning from war. They would mention the scandal that nearly destroyed him and the mysterious woman who saved him from it. But those who knew the family told a different story. They spoke of a duke who laughed, who played with his children in the gardens of Ravenhold, who danced with his wife at every ball and looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. They spoke of a woman who had been invisible, who had worn borrowed mourning clothes and sat in silence, who had been chosen by the most feared man in the kingdom and transformed his life simply by loving him. And every year, on the anniversary of their meeting, the Duke and Duchess of Valmir returned to St. Crispin's Cathedral. They sat in the same pew where it had all begun, she in elegant black silk, he in ceremonial dress, and when the bells rang out, Seren would rest her head against her husband's shoulder and close her eyes. Not from fatigue, not from boredom, but because some traditions, the ones born from accidents and impossibilities, become the sweetest rituals of all.